Yes, I enjoyed it very much. I wouldn't want to be known as only a sex symbol.
Right.
I wanted to be known as an actress,
Sure.
as equally or even more so. Like Marilyn Monroe, she was known as the greatest, and rightly so, sex symbol of all time. Boy, try to do Shakespeare after that.
In a world where Hollywood glitters under the spotlight, few stars have shone as brilliantly as Angie Dickinson. Known for her fierce beauty, magnetic screen presence, and trailblazing roles, she became a symbol of cool confidence in an era when few women were allowed to claim that space. But behind the scenes, Angie's journey was not paved solely with admiration. Like every icon who stood the test of time, she faced her fair share of betrayals, ego clashes, and bitter rivalries. For decades, fans only saw the polished surface, the glamorous photos, the red carpet smiles, the effortless charm that made her a legend. But off camera, there were tensions simmering, grudges held close, and names she rarely spoke out loud. Until now. This is the untold story of the 7 actors Angie Dickinson hated the most, the men whose behavior, arrogance, or betrayals left lasting scars on one of Hollywood's most unforgettable leading ladies. Some of these names might shock you, pulling back the curtain on friendships that soured and partnerships that crumbled. Others might make you nod knowingly as the darker side of Hollywood's golden age is finally laid bare. Why did Angie, known for her grace and professionalism, carry such deep frustrations? What happened behind closed doors or under the glare of studio lights to turn admiration into contempt? And how did these encounters shape the woman who remained a force in film and television for over 6 decades? As we walk through each name on this list, we'll revisit iconic films, explosive personal moments, and the emotional undercurrents that shaped Angie's complicated legacy. Prepare to see Hollywood's most celebrated faces in a new light, through the eyes of a woman who loved fiercely, worked tirelessly, and never forgot the people who crossed her. Stay with us, because by the end of this journey, you'll understand not only who made Angie Dickinson's life more difficult, but why these stories still matter today. John Wayne, the cowboy who pushed too far. When Angie Dickinson first stepped onto the set of Rio Bravo in 1959, she was both nervous and exhilarated. Sharing the screen with John Wayne, the Duke himself, was every rising actor's dream. Wayne wasn't just a star, he was an institution, the embodiment of rugged American masculinity, commanding respect the moment he walked onto a set. But as Angie quickly learned, working with a legend can be a double-edged sword. At first, she admired his professionalism. John Wayne had a magnetic presence, a way of making every scene feel larger than life. Yet behind the camera, that same larger-than-life persona became suffocating. Wayne dominated not just the script, but the atmosphere, making it clear that there was only room for one true star. Angie, who was young but fiercely independent, bristled at his heavy-handed control. She later recounted how Wayne often dismissed her ideas, treating her like a decorative prop rather than a skilled actress. What stung most wasn't just his dismissal. It was the way he made her feel small in front of the crew, as if her talent was secondary to his towering image. One moment particularly stuck with her. On set, during a heated discussion about how to play a crucial emotional scene, Angie tried to suggest a softer, more nuanced approach. Wayne, firm in his cowboy persona, shut her down with a terse comment, brushing aside her input without a second thought. That exchange left Angie humiliated and seething. She realized that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how passionately she brought her character to life, the Duke had already decided her place in the pecking order. And it was far beneath his own. Offset, things weren't much better. Wayne's old-school views about women and their roles in Hollywood grated on Angie. She believed in breaking molds, in pushing past the stereotypes of the damsel or the sidekick, while Wayne clung to a more rigid, patriarchal idea of who belonged where on screen. Over time, the tension simmered, turning admiration into quiet resentment. Even decades later, when asked about her time working with Wayne, Angie couldn't fully hide her frustration. She respected his craft, but she resented the way he wielded his power, as a bludgeon rather than a bridge. That frustration never quite faded, making John Wayne one of the actors she struggled to forgive. For Angie Dickinson, it was a reminder that sometimes sharing the screen with a legend can leave behind not just unforgettable memories, but painful scars. Frank Sinatra. From Romance to Resentment. Few names in Hollywood's golden age carry as much weight as Frank Sinatra. He was the voice of a generation, the swaggering, blue-eyed crooner who could melt hearts with a single note. For Angie Dickinson, Sinatra wasn't just a fellow celebrity. He was a man she deeply loved. Their relationship was a storm of passion, admiration, and undeniable chemistry, lighting up the gossip columns and enchanting fans who saw them as the ultimate Hollywood couple. But beneath the glimmering surface, cracks began to form. Cracks that would widen into bitter fault lines, leaving Angie with deep-seated resentment toward the man she once adored. When they first met, Angie was drawn in by Sinatra's charm. He was magnetic, intoxicating, the kind of man who could make a room stop simply by walking in. But she quickly discovered that his charisma came with a price: control. Sinatra was used to getting his way, in music, in business, and in love. What began as romantic attention slowly morphed into possessiveness. He wanted Angie on his arm, in his world, fitting into his life on his terms. For a fiercely independent woman like Angie, who was determined to build her own career, that was a suffocating prospect. Their fights became legendary among those close to them. Angie, passionate and unafraid to stand her ground, clashed with Sinatra over everything from career choices to social events. One particularly bruising argument, whispered about in Hollywood circles, erupted when Angie turned down an invitation to one of Sinatra's high-profile gatherings, choosing instead to focus on her own filming commitments. To Sinatra, it was a betrayal. To Angie, it was an assertion of her own priorities. The fallout was swift and cutting. Words were exchanged that couldn't be taken back, and wounds were left that never quite healed. But it wasn't just the private fights that left a mark. Sinatra's public persona, the cool, untouchable leader of the Rat Pack, often overshadowed Angie, making her feel like a supporting act in his grand performance. She began to see the cracks in the image, the temper, the controlling tendencies, the expectation that she would fall in line. And when the relationship ultimately unraveled, Angie was left not only heartbroken, but hardened. Looking back, Angie has spoken with a mix of fondness and frustration about her time with Sinatra. She respected his talent, even admired his artistry. But she couldn't forgive the way their relationship drained her, the way it forced her to fight for air in a world where his voice always boomed louder. What started as romance ended in resentment, and for Angie Dickinson, Frank Sinatra became not just a lover lost, but a symbol of the price she paid to hold on to herself. Dean Martin, the laugh that cut too deep. To the public, Dean Martin was a lovable rogue, the crooner with the velvet voice, the man with a drink in one hand and a wink in the other, always ready with a joke. On screen and on stage, his charm seemed effortless, his humor sharp but harmless. But for Angie Dickinson, working alongside Dean Martin revealed a much different, far more complicated side to the man behind the grin, one that left her feeling small, stung, and ultimately fed up. Their paths crossed in the tightly knit circles of 1960s Hollywood, where everyone knew everyone, and no gathering was complete without Dean's booming laughter echoing through the room. Angie admired his talent. Who didn't? His voice could melt a crowd, his timing could carry a scene, and his presence lit up even the dullest parties. But beneath the charm, Angie discovered, was a biting edge. Dean's humor, which seemed playful from the outside, often cut too close for comfort behind closed doors. There was one particular incident that Angie never quite shook off. At a dinner party packed with Hollywood elites, Dean, in his usual playful fashion, started teasing Angie in front of the group. What began as harmless ribbing about her acting style soon escalated into sharp digs about her looks, her career choices, and even her personal life. Angie smiled politely at first, trying to brush it off. She knew how these things worked, and she wasn't new to the game. But as the jabs kept coming, her chest tightened, her smile strained, and she felt a flush of humiliation creeping up her neck. What hurt wasn't just the words. It was the laughter that followed, the way the room seemed to side with Dean, brushing her off as if she were simply being too sensitive. For Angie, that night crystallized something she had long suspected. Dean's humor wasn't always harmless. Behind the easygoing persona was a man who knew exactly where to land a verbal punch, and who sometimes enjoyed doing it a little too much. Their working relationship cooled after that. Angie remained professional, of course, she always did, but she never quite forgot the sting of that night, the sense of being undermined by someone who was supposed to be a friend. Years later, when reflecting on her experiences with Dean Martin, Angie spoke with a mix of sadness and disappointment. She respected his talent and understood his appeal, but she also knew how it felt to stand on the receiving end of a joke that went too far. For Angie Dickinson, Dean Martin became a reminder that in Hollywood, not every laugh is meant to lift you up. Sometimes it's meant to put you in your place. Burt Reynolds, Competition and Clash. Burt Reynolds was the kind of Hollywood figure who could light up a room before he even stepped inside. His charm was legendary, his smile electric, and his confidence almost mythical. For many, Burt represented the rugged, playful energy of 1970s cinema. But for Angie Dickinson, he represented something else entirely: competition, ego, and a clash that neither star would ever fully forget. Angie and Burt crossed paths during a period when both were at the top of their games. She was the cool, sultry star of Policewoman, a pioneer for women on television, while Burt was dominating the box office with hits like Smokey and the Bandit. On paper, they should have been a natural match, two good-looking, fiercely talented stars with charisma to spare. But instead, their worlds collided like two supernovas, brilliant, explosive, and ultimately unable to share the same space without tension. The source of their friction wasn't simple. Part of it was professional jealousy, though neither would admit it outright. Angie, who had worked hard to earn respect in a male-dominated industry, felt the sting when Burt would casually dismiss her work or suggest, even jokingly, that television was a step below film. Burt, on the other hand, was known for his teasing humor, but with Angie, those jokes didn't land. What started as playful banter often veered into condescension, making her feel like she was constantly being sized up, compared, and challenged. Their most notable clash happened off-set, at a Hollywood charity event. Surrounded by reporters and cameras, Burt made a comment about Angie's role on television, hinting that sheriffs and badges were cute but didn't hold up next to the big-screen legends. Angie, never one to back down, shot back with a biting remark about box office gimmicks and toupees. The exchange, though masked with smiles and laughter, rippled through the room, a public display of the sharp-edged rivalry simmering beneath their polished exteriors. Privately, Angie confided to friends that Burt's bravado wore thin over time. She respected his talent, sure, but she saw through the charm to the insecurities underneath. The need to dominate every conversation, to be the center of attention, to outshine everyone in the room. For a woman who had carved out her own hard-won place in Hollywood, that was exhausting. Looking back, Angie often reflected on Burt Reynolds as a kind of cautionary figure, a reminder that charm can be a mask, and that some rivalries are less about dislike and more about the impossibility of sharing the same spotlight. While she never wished him harm, she couldn't deny that he remained one of the most challenging personalities she ever crossed paths with. A competitor she admired, resented, and ultimately chose to keep at arm's length. Lee Marvin, rough edges and rougher words. Lee Marvin was the epitome of the rough-and-tumble Hollywood tough guy, a man whose gravelly voice and rugged looks made him a natural fit for the gritty roles he so often played. To audiences, he was magnetic, an actor who could command a scene with the flick of a cigarette or the narrowing of his steely eyes. But to Angie Dickinson, Lee Marvin was something else, a storm she had to weather, a co-star whose sharp edges cut deeper than the characters he played on screen. Their most memorable collaboration came on the set of Point Blank, a 1967 crime thriller that paired Angie's cool, composed elegance with Marvin's raw intensity. On screen, their chemistry sizzled. Off screen, however, it was a different story entirely. Angie, known for her professionalism, walked onto set each day prepared, focused, and eager to bring her best. Marvin, on the other hand, brought with him a restless, unpredictable energy, a mix of creative brilliance and personal demons that often spilled over into the work. From the start, Angie sensed the tension. Marvin had little patience for rehearsals, often relying on his natural instincts rather than sticking to the script. While that spontaneity worked brilliantly on camera, behind the scenes, it created friction. Angie found herself frustrated by his casual attitude, the way he'd brush off direction, and especially the way he sometimes snapped at the crew or dismissed her input with a gruff remark. She later recalled how Marvin once, in a fit of irritation, cut her off mid-sentence during a rehearsal, barking that the scene was his, a moment that left her stunned and quietly seething. What made it harder was that Angie admired Marvin's talent. She couldn't deny his brilliance, his sheer magnetism, or the way his performances crackled with authenticity. But she also couldn't ignore the rougher side of his personality. The mood swings, the harsh words, the drinking that sometimes bled into the workday. For a woman who prided herself on discipline and respect, Marvin's volatility became exhausting. Over time, Angie's frustration turned into something colder, a lingering resentment. She grew tired of making allowances, of brushing off bad behavior simply because someone was talented. While she never publicly trashed Marvin, she also never pretended they were close. In interviews, her praise for his acting was always carefully measured, her memories tinged with a sense of regret for what could have been a more positive working relationship. For Angie Dickinson, Lee Marvin became a symbol of the kind of man Hollywood often protected. Brilliant but volatile, charismatic but careless, celebrated for his genius but rarely held accountable for the chaos he left behind. And though she respected his legacy, she couldn't help but carry a lasting bitterness for the rough words and rougher moments they shared. Peter Falk, the detective who rubbed her the wrong way. Peter Falk was, to the outside world, the beloved face of Columbo, a detective whose rumpled trench coat, quirky mannerisms, and unforgettable "just one more thing" made him a television icon. Fans adored his offbeat charm, the mix of shrewd intelligence and unassuming awkwardness that defined his roles. But for Angie Dickinson, Peter Falk's quirks didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Off-screen, those same traits that made him a fan favorite became a source of friction, annoyance, and eventually lasting resentment. Their connection wasn't through a single big project, but through years of crossing paths on the Hollywood circuit, charity events, award shows, industry parties, and the occasional guest appearance. Angie was a picture of polished grace, known for her composure and quiet authority. Peter, on the other hand, was unpredictable, sometimes eccentric, and often scattered in a way that grated on her nerves. To Angie, it felt like he never quite respected the unspoken rules of professionalism, that his offbeat style wasn't just an act for the cameras, but a habit that seeped into every corner of his life, often at the expense of others' patience. There was one night in particular that sealed her opinion of Falk. They were both attending a black-tie industry gala, seated at the same table alongside other A-listers. Angie, always attentive to conversation, tried to engage Peter in a discussion about an upcoming project they were both loosely tied to. Instead of a thoughtful reply, Peter kept interrupting with random anecdotes, diverting the conversation to himself and derailing every serious point she tried to make with quirky, offhand comments. At first, Angie tried to laugh it off. She knew Peter's reputation for oddball humor, but as the night dragged on, her patience wore thin. She felt dismissed, overshadowed, and ultimately disrespected. For Angie, it wasn't about one evening, it was about the pattern. She found Peter Falk's unpredictability exhausting, his charm masking a lack of focus and consideration. While others were charmed by his eccentricity, Angie saw someone who wasn't fully present, someone who could steal a conversation without even realizing the effect. What made it worse was that Angie deeply valued respect in her interactions. She was a woman who had fought hard to carve out space in an industry that often tried to sideline her, and she had little tolerance for anyone who treated her input as background noise. With Peter Falk, she felt her contributions were continually brushed aside. Not with malice, perhaps, but with a casualness that stung all the same. In the years that followed, Angie rarely spoke about Falk in interviews. When she did, her words were polite but distant, carefully avoiding any warmth or nostalgia. For her, Peter Falk remained a figure she couldn't fully embrace, a man whose quirks, however endearing to the world, left her feeling quietly exasperated and ultimately estranged. Robert Mitchum, smoldering tension. Robert Mitchum was the very definition of brooding charisma. With his heavy-lidded eyes, smoky voice, and unmistakable swagger, Mitchum embodied the kind of dangerous charm that made women swoon and directors marvel. To the public, he was the ultimate cool, a man who could silence a room with a glance and carry a scene with a barely whispered line. But to Angie Dickinson, Robert Mitchum was something altogether different, a coiled spring of tension, a man whose quiet intensity wasn't alluring but suffocating, leaving her with memories she'd rather forget. Their interactions weren't marked by loud arguments or fiery showdowns. Instead, they were defined by an uneasy undercurrent, an invisible push and pull that made every shared moment feel heavy. Angie, used to holding her own among Hollywood's biggest personalities, found Mitchum uniquely hard to read. He was unpredictable, sometimes disarmingly charming, sometimes cold and dismissive, creating a constant guessing game that wore on her nerves. She later described him as a man who didn't need to say much to make you feel uneasy. And that unease lingered long after their projects together wrapped. On one particular film set, the tension reached a breaking point. Angie had been rehearsing a pivotal emotional scene, preparing to deliver a performance she hoped would bring nuance and vulnerability to her character. As the cameras rolled, Mitchum remained distant, his replies clipped, his eyes almost challenging. Between takes, Angie tried to approach him, suggesting they work through the emotional beats together to strengthen the dynamic. Mitchum, with his trademark cool detachment, smirked and told her not to overthink it. That dismissive attitude cut deep. Angie wasn't just a pretty face on set. She was an actress who took her craft seriously, and Mitchum's aloofness felt like a slap. What made it even more frustrating was Mitchum's effortless magnetism. He had a way of pulling focus, of commanding attention without lifting a finger, leaving Angie feeling overshadowed despite her own considerable talent. She resented how easily he dismissed the collaborative process, how little effort he seemed to put into building chemistry off-screen, and how he left her to carry the emotional weight of their scenes alone. Over the years, Angie's recollections of Mitchum remained colored by that simmering tension. She respected his talent, acknowledged his legendary status, but never warmed to the memory of working with him. To her, he represented a particular type of Hollywood man, a man so used to being revered that he no longer felt the need to meet others halfway, so locked in his own legend that collaboration became an afterthought. For Angie Dickinson, Robert Mitchum was the final name on a list of actors who left her not just frustrated, but fundamentally changed. He reminded her of the silent battles waged behind the camera, the unseen costs of stardom, and the lingering ache of partnerships that never quite found their rhythm. As we pull back the curtain on Angie Dickinson's long and storied career, one thing becomes clear: even the brightest stars carry shadows. For decades, audiences saw Angie as the elegant, unflappable woman on screen, the fearless detective, the alluring leading lady, the Hollywood icon. But behind those polished performances was a woman who navigated bruising rivalries, towering egos, and complicated relationships that left marks not easily erased. Each of the 7 actors she resented, John Wayne, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Burt Reynolds, Lee Marvin, Peter Falk, and Robert Mitchum, shaped her journey in different ways. Some challenged her professionally, others wounded her personally, and all left her with stories she carried quietly for years. These weren't just petty grudges or fleeting disagreements. They were moments that shaped her understanding of power, respect, and the often unspoken struggles faced by women in an industry that expected them to smile through it all. And now, we turn the question to you. Were you surprised by the names on Angie Dickinson's list? Did you expect different actors, or did these stories reveal a side of Hollywood you'd never imagined? We want to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden chapter of classic Hollywood, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an untold story from the golden age of film and television. Join us next time as we peel back even more layers behind the legends you thought you knew. Because in Hollywood, the real stories are always waiting just beneath the surface.